I always feel like I start talking first, Andy. So
Please
apologies for
do.
jumping in. Um, one of the things that I was kind of advocating in our group in terms of thinking about being a non-anxious presence is more than just kind of saying the what I describe as the Sunday school answers that, oh, we just need to read the Bible and pray. Um, the fight or flight is part of the sympathetic nervous system. And so I was thinking, this is very much about what's happening in our bodies rather than just the theory of things. And so I'm a big fan of breath prayer because it works with the sympathetic nervous system. Um, because we need to kind of feel it rather than it just being this kind of theoretical knowledge. And so, for those of you who don't know, breath prayer, we use a two-part phrase and breathing in the first part of the phrase and breathing out the second part of the phrase. And I'm sort of talking to people about using that. You can just do it as a one-off, of course, like in a response to a Bible reading or something. I think when you're trying to get real truth into us, I have found using the same breath prayer that really speaks and kind of hits the nail on the head for months or even years to really kind of get it to be a physical experience rather than just a theory. That would be certainly a tool that I find helpful.
Brilliant. Yeah, absolutely. And sometimes, yeah, breathing is sometimes the answer. The ancient art of breathing. Yeah, good. Other resources or things that people find helpful?
Yeah, we obviously talked about started with prayer, um, and also recognizing that it's God's church, that He is building it, and that we're called to minister within it, but we are not called to fix other people because we can't even fix ourselves. In Leslie's words, it's like it. It's allowing that. And for me, I've spent a lot of time over the last little while in 1 Corinthians 2 and seeking the mind of Christ. And if we're seeking the mind of Christ, it's that, oh, what would Jesus do? It's kind of flippant, but it's deeper than that. It's seeking the mind of Christ, which the mind of Christ is always going to be loving and gracious and towards the individuals. But he's also a God of justice. And where there is conflict or many voices of many different, like a PCC meeting where there's many different voices about how we should deal with the lack of finance, lack of resources, whatever it is, that ultimately, if there are different opinions, that we all step back to go away and seek the mind of Christ. So it doesn't become our agenda, it's God's agenda, so that we can come to a consensus. And for me, those are kind of principles that I rest on. Andy knows I did my first theological reflection was on dealing with conflict within a very volatile situation, and it was about drawing boundaries where the behavior was unacceptable, but making sure that the person knew that they were loved and accepted despite that, in order to protect the other people, this is where I'm drawing the line. But come and have a coffee with me. I still want to spend time with you, and those kind of things.
Yeah, very, really good. Time for a couple more comments.
Well, Andy, there's one thing I've just thought of that is going to be helpful to some of us, but not all of us. Is I, I became aware after we came back from the um, breakout room that a resource for those of us who are on the associate pathway, particularly if we're self-supporting and everything, is that the institution does push for results. And that is, and for good reasons, you can appreciate it, but the incumbent in particular is going to feel it much more than us. So it is a bit easier for associate pathway people, particularly if it's not our job. I mean, there's all the other issues of course, and our sense of responsibility and accountability for what we do and the rest of it. But it must be much worse for incumbents.
I think that's really perceptive. And I think it is true that the Church of England in general has sometimes had a target culture that incumbents have been victims of. And it is exhausting to be living in a culture that is constantly expecting of you, especially a culture that expects of you things that are only in the power of the Holy Spirit to grant. And Bishop Gulley, of course, as you'll know, has spoken about moving from a targets culture to a faithfulness culture. But I think she'd be the first to acknowledge that that's easier said than done for all of us. And I think Matt was referring to that a little bit in terms of generosity, that the more anxious we are, the more difficult it is to be generous. And our relationship with those who are not attending church, you know, I'm sure you've all heard me say this before, but there is the danger that instead of approaching people and saying, come meet with Jesus and then you will have life, we say, come and join our church, otherwise our institution is going to die. How do we inject the without removing the sense that we are responsible and there are serious commands in Scripture that we need to obey? How do we nevertheless have the lightness of touch of those who do not have the world resting on our shoulders and who know that an anxious system is going to be completely counterproductive for all the things that we're longing for in church life? I mean, yeah, so I did a bit of work with a set of churches that were in vacancy, you know, helping them think about what to put in their parish profile. And I'll never forget, you know, we did a thing with post-it notes and so on all over the room to try and consult people. And I'll never forget, somebody wrote down, I would like to feel better when I leave church than I did when I arrived, not more anxious. So, oh yeah, I hear that. And honestly, that isn't an unrealistic thing or an unreasonable thing for somebody to ask of their church, that it isn't going to stress them out, that it's actually going to bring joy into their lives when they go to it. But there is such a danger that church does not, in fact, have that result on us. Time for one more comment if somebody else would like to speak about where you turn to reduce your anxiety levels as a Christian leader. in that case, let me just talk for a little bit about organizations working in this sphere. One place that has done loads of work on this is the London Mennonite Centre. So it was founded in the 1950s. Mennonites, as you'll know, are an Anabaptist group. They're one of the historic peace churches, as they're called. And in 1995, a guy called Alistair Mackay, who at that point was chairing the London Mennonite Centre, became the first employee of a charity called Bridge Builders. And it was a project focused on serving the church and helping it seek peace and reconciliation. Gradually, Alistair Mackay built that charity into perhaps the leading sort of UK church charity working in that sphere. And then, ironically, he went off and got ordained through St. Mellitus College as an Anglican priest, but he continued his work for Bridge Builders. And then, founded under the leadership of Archbishop Justin, the Reconciliation Initiatives, for which he still works. Somebody called Liz Griffiths, no relation of mine, took over as director of Bridge Builders in 2019. And in the coming year, a number of people are going to receive training from Bridge Builders who are working within the Diocese of Chelmsford. We've got somebody called Ruth Adams, who actually works in the Diocese of Ely, but is giving us some of her time in order to build up conflict transformation ministries within the Diocese of Chelmsford. We're trying to build a common vocabulary and a common approach. So our senior leadership team, our bishops and archdeacons, have received some training from Ruth on exactly these subjects to try and make sure that it's at the heart of what we as a diocese do, and that these approaches find their way. And I'm just obviously you're not all about to go on a Bridge Builders training, and we're going to finish this session well before 9, so don't worry. But let me go through some of the things that Bridge Builders suggests when we're facing conflict situations. Just 4 things. The first thing they suggest is give value to storytelling. Make sure that everyone has a chance to tell their story about whatever's going on. And it really helps if a leader can summarize, even if it feels like, gosh, this is taking ages, summarize what people are saying so that they know that you have heard them properly. Secondly, identifying common ground and issues. We're not pretending that everybody agrees, really. In fact, it is really healthy for churches to disagree about stuff. But if we can identify common ground, it makes it more likely that we can have respectful conversations that get somewhere. Thirdly, they talk about healing. And the healing is not for everyone to agree. The healing is for everyone honestly to face where the disagreement lies. Reading from the manual, you only work with one issue at a time. You look to what is beneath the surface, not just people's initial positions. You're quick to work with feelings. And there is something healing about having an agreement understood and heard, even if the issues have not been resolved. And then finally, the sense of a way forward. Where there's an instance of conflict, rarely will we end up with a compromise that everyone is happy with. But there can be a way forward that recognizes the difference and the disagreement in a fair way. Where something can be implemented that is life-giving for all concerned. And often there are is life-giving in a way that would not have happened had the disagreement not occurred. So that's the hope. And in all of it, we're never asking anybody to cease to hold their principled stand. But we're also never asking anybody to cease to be emotionally connected, even with those with whom they disagree. And that's really difficult because we all naturally want to fight or we want to withdraw. And somehow or other, as long as it's safe for everyone to do so, we're trying to keep everybody in emotional connection without giving up the principles that matter. So I'm going to finish with a story about me, if I may. And we talked about family systems. So I'll talk about my family. So here's the story that for several decades I used to tell about myself. At least I used to tell this to myself, if not to other people. I come from a family that is quite chaotic. My dad had borderline personality disorder. He wasn't employed since the 1960s. He came to believe a large number of things that were quite difficult, including demonic forces centered on the Wilson and Callahan administrations, including that the Secret Service was tracking every act that he did, and including that churches were deeply wrong. He was quite ecumenical in his attitude to churches. So from time to time, we as a family would end up visiting a church where he would have a shouting match with the pastor or the priest or the vicar, or, it didn't really matter very much. It was a very high conflict situation. And for decades, I've told myself, I don't like conflict. I move away from conflict because my family experience of conflict was poor. And in the last year, I've come to realize that that story that I kept telling myself isn't quite true. Because actually, I never felt unsafe. Actually, although there was chaos in my family, there was a lot of love as well. Actually, I learned an awful lot and became the person I am because of that family situation I was in. And actually, oddly enough, I can move towards chaos and division, precisely because my family situation was being in it and not being harmed, or at least not being unsafe because of it. And realizing that completely changed my view both of conflict and of myself. Um, I went on a week residential training with Bridge Builders, the organization that I mentioned, back in February this year. And as part of that week, we had an afternoon off, and it was at Woking, which isn't very far from where I grew up. So for the first time for many years, I drove to my childhood home when we had that free time. And I rang the doorbell of what had been my childhood home. Of course, the people living there had never heard of me. Why would they have? But they were very hospitable and invited me to have a look around and see what they'd done with the place. And I found it extraordinarily healing. And coming to terms with my family's experience of conflict and my experience of anxiety as a child has helped me make decisions about what I'm going to do in my ministerial life now. So when Bishop Adam asked, and Archdeacon Jonathan asked me to go in and be an interim minister in a church which has had a lot of conflict and where the previous vicar left after having really quite a poor time that had involved a lot of conflict with leaders there, I came to the point to say, no, I can do that. Let me have a go. And I tell you what, it's quite fun. It's actually to the challenge of being a non-anxious presence in a highly conflictual situation is really quite enjoyable. So that's my story. And of course, the great thing is I cannot possibly leave that group of people more dysfunctional than I found it. So there's no pressure at all on me and all that. And maybe you, I don't know. It is possible there's somebody on this call to whom God is calling to a ministry like that. And others of you, absolutely not. And that's fine. That's up to God. But actually, there's something beautiful, I think, where people get that right and manage to do non-anxious presence in a way that transforms the communities of which they're a part.